filmmaker, documentary maker for the last 22 years. I'm really proud to be hosting a new series for Zoom called Sound is the New 4K. Why, you might ask? Well, regardless what new kit and cameras you've got, without the right sound, really it doesn't bring your stories or your films to life. And today, I'm really stoked to have Nigel Christensen, who's made sound his life. You might know him from the sounds you heard on Fury Road from Mad Max back in 2015. Nigel, g'day, welcome.
G'day, Anthony. Very nice to be here talking to you.
So I'm actually quite pleased to be chatting to you because you've made sound your life as opposed to me that brought sound into my life. What drove you towards sound design? Because going back in the day, it was quite a niche.
Yeah, I think it started very early on with an obsession with cartoons. And as a kid, like when I was 5, 6, 7, and I actually have here in the studio with me a device, an object that started my whole career, which is this whistle. It's called the Acme Siren. And I remember I was watching a cartoon. This was my granddad's. I was watching a cartoon and I heard, and I remember thinking, wait a minute, that's Granddad's whistle. How did Granddad's whistle get in there? And I just remember for ages, I was just running around the house going, all that sort of stuff with the whistle. And I really started then noticing what else was in the soundtracks for the things that I was watching. And I was a bit of a natural mimic. And I started imitating sounds and playing around with sounds. And in high school, I was drawn to music. And I was quite a natural at music, I think, from having a bit of a mimic's brain. And it just sort of evolved from there.
It's one of these things, though, that when you talk about sound, people really don't understand what it is. They just take it for granted. They'll watch, especially with the documentaries I make, they'll just watch it. They don't know why they're smiling, why they're crying, why they're fearful, where the emotion comes from. Early on, you obviously were taught to smile from that crazy whistle. From your mind, what was sound to you back then? How did you develop that understanding that sound was important, and what is it to you?
I think for me, all sound is in a way musical. Music and sound are interchangeable, and music is highly organized sound, and sound perhaps is nascent or latent music. It hasn't been made into music yet. So I think the two are very closely related, certainly in my mind. And I found, I could cheer myself up pretty readily by creating sounds or making sounds or mimicking things. And I suppose you get better at the things that you practice. And I was listening all the time to things and listening to music very intensely. And then beyond pop music, finding very weird esoteric music and getting a feel for how sounds can be emotive, sounds that may not typically be thought of as being emotive. One of the favorite albums I found that was a good example of this was by a German composer called Stephen Mikus, who made a whole suite of music from flower pots. He just sourced flower pots of all different sizes and shapes and checked which ones were what note, and made a sort of flower pot orchestra and made music from flower pots. It's a little bit like a gamelan. And I suppose I just always sought out interesting and exciting and emotive instruments and things that produce sound, whether they're instruments or not.
I suppose what we might do is we might cover the range of what you've had as a career, because some people might not know what you've been involved in, and then we'll go back into sort of dissecting it a bit, because there's a bit of a chasm between a Fury Road and a Lego movie.
There is. It's very different from the audience's experience. But I suppose I'll talk a little bit about the range of work that I've done. In high school, when I was into photography, I was into music, and I was into writing. And my music teacher said, Mrs. Mack, she said, "Well, Nigel, that's filmmaking. Filmmaking covers all those areas." So I was like, okay, filmmaking, particularly with a bent towards sound. And I was studying or learning to be an assistant editor. And at a certain point, the people employing me said, "So do you want to pursue sound or vision? What do you think you want to do?" And I very quickly realized it was sound, because I just obsessed with it, still am. So I started, the very first production I worked on was E Street, I was a sound editor and then a sound supervisor for E Street when I was maybe 20 or 21, something like that. And that, that was a lot of fun, a lot of work, very fast turnaround. And so I started working in the television sector more than film. The first feature film I worked on was a film called Father, starring Max von Sydow, made in the 90s. I was just an assistant sound editor on that. From there, so that was back in the early 90s. So it's 30 years, more or less now, that I've been working professionally in the sound for film area as a sound designer or sound editor or sound supervisor and sound mixer, ranging from shows like E Street to Black Beauty, a lot of children's television, Girl from Tomorrow sort of sci-fi work, up into more feature films like Happy Feet 1 and 2, Lego Movie, Lego Batman, Lego Ninjago, and as well a lot of animated television shows. Bananas in Pajamas, for example, was one I worked on a lot. Another cartoon or animation called Bottle Top Bill for ABC TV, which is a very, very exhaustive sound project, because it's the whole concept of that animation was that the whole world is made from things that you find in your kitchen and everything assembles in front of you. And I created the sounds of everything assembling frame by frame from the things that you can see. So I had a studio like this filled with junk and tiny Foley. And I spent years working on that, and that really honed my sound design for animation and highly creative sound work, and then I started approaching some of the larger productions and larger companies and secured work on Happy Feet, which then led to more developed film work, which not long after that I worked on Australia as well with Baz Luhrmann. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Mad Max Fury Road in 2015, which was an enormous job. But also on those big films, I'm just one of a team, and we all get specialized areas to work on, and we focus on those for months, which can be terrifying. but it's all at heart. It's the same principle. It's using sound to tell a story and to convey an emotion. Whether that sound is a mountain exploding like in Mad Max Fury Road, or if it's bottle tops being used to make footsteps in Bottle Top Bill. It's still the same principles and the same key mental approach.
That's what I love about talking to professionals. It just sort of flows out as if it's pretty simple. Like, let's go and make a mountain explode, or let's go and click 2 Lego blocks together. It's that simple, right? I mean, you've got a mountain out the back of your studio that you blow up, and you've got some Lego in your
of course,
right?
Yeah. Well, I keep a stockpile of them out there just for that.
So it's
you
quite
never
simple.
know what's going to come in.
So when if we break it down a little bit, because there's sort of 3 areas I want to sort of go around, so people can I guess get an understanding of this. You don't just turn up at a set and say, okay, now what are we going to do? Take us through the process of what sound design is and what elements you have to construct, both on location, maybe some from your library, and how the sound works within a film in the production process.
Sure. So being a sound designer, I largely work in post-production, which is everything that's happened after the filming. There are some projects where I go to location and I'll do some discussions with the sound recordist or the production sound mixer, or I'll do the sound recording or sound effects recording myself. It varies a lot. I mean, one project that comes to mind that I did 2 years ago now was actually an immersive museum installation in a war museum in France. It's called the Sir John Monash Centre. It was an enormous project. And it's a 200 screen wraparound cinema with a 48 channel custom surround system that will play for 100 years is the brief. So it plays all day, every day for a century. And a company in Canberra were producing the film, but all the actual location work was done in New Zealand, because Peter Jackson over there has an enormous collection of World War I planes and toys, and he offered them up for the filming. So I went to New Zealand, with my Zoom F8, which is here somewhere, and I recorded all Peter Jackson's World War I aircraft and cannon and rifles and soldiers doing things. So I spent a week there. I knew what I needed to record, and we arranged that I could record it while I was there. Then I came back to my studio, this one here, and spent the next year slowly putting that together as they put the film together. And then we actually went to France, and we mixed the actual soundtrack and the film in situ in the immersive cinema in France, because it's the only one of its kind in the world. So to finish it, it had to be done in the space where it's going to play, because it's not going to play anywhere else ever. So that was, and that was also working closely with the composer, Raj Kamal. And we spent a lot of time honing and shaping and sort of shifting instruments versus sounds versus effects to create an overall emotional experience. It's always about creating an emotional experience.
Oh, well, that's it. And I guess the sound, and I've told people that have worked with me over the years that you've got the vision sort of just supplements the sound, and people always see it the other way around. You can't fix bad sound. You can always fix bad vision. And I think what you're talking about, from rather large projects down to the same principles apply to even small projects. If you had to make a little home video for your kids, for example, maybe take us through the basics are still the same all the way through. It doesn't matter how big it is, you still got to have the fundamentals.
That's right. And and some of those fundamentals are technical. You ideally you want to have a sound that's cleanly recorded, that's not distorted, that's very bright, has lots of dynamics, and feels great to just hear a sound on its own. And then it has to be like the right sound, where the way it's performed or the way it's manipulated, the object that you while you're recording it. And then it comes into the timing and or the manipulating of the sound in post-production, so that it then produces the results you want. And I've found over the years that I have a couple of ways of telling if something works. If it's for cartoons and things, or animations or Lego movie, if it makes me giggle, if it can make me giggle after I've heard the sound 20, 30, 50 times, if I can still put a little sequence of maybe 5 sounds together and I giggle or I go, ha, then I know, okay, if I enjoy it, I know someone who's never seen it before is also going to enjoy it at least as much, hopefully more. And similarly, it's that way with sounds that aren't humorous, that aren't comedic. If they're more serious or more moving, if I experience the emotional connection with the moment through the sound after I've heard it so many times, then I know that will work. And the other thing, which is a strange one, I didn't really realize I was doing, was my body tenses while I'm working on a sequence. I actually tense up, and when it's right, I relax. So it's a strange thing that I have to kind of allow my intuition or my gut feeling to direct. Do I need to keep working on this, or is this performing now? And if I relax, yeah, there we go.
Exactly. And are you ever happy? Because I know as an editor, you're always going back and you've got to draw that line in the sand and go, okay, look, this is it. They won't know the difference if I do X, Y, and Z. Let's just go with it. Are you a perfectionist, or do you know where your limits are so it basically doesn't drive you crazy?
Well, ideally, if there's time, yes, I'll be a perfectionist and I'll fiddle about ad nauseum on something that may not be heard. They talk about diminishing returns. You reach a point where they certainly can't tell, and there's even points where other people I'm working with are like, "No, I think you're done, mate. I think that might be okay." And I'm like, "No, I reckon there's a little bit more in there." But but working professionally, budget is a big factor, and it is work. And there are times where you look at a project and go, okay, well, there are areas where I have to be very, very tight with my time and my focus, so I can allow time for other areas. So I might identify certain sections or aspects of a film or a show where I know I want those to be great, and I will put the attention into those, and others I will say, well, in the scheme of things, this will be fine. It's certainly still going to be enjoyable. It won't be perhaps as finessed as I might like it, but this is the budget and the situation that we're in. So it's about the dance of perfectionism versus reality.
Yeah, exactly right. And also now, what I've found, I mean, what brought me to Zoom in the first place is the portability, and that I didn't have to personally lug the same amount of sound gear around as I did camera gear. In your mind, because you've seen the gamut of sound change over 20 or 30 years, has it become far more easier to capture really quality sound without having to do your audio engineering degree. So at least you've got a really good starting point, and especially for people that might be starting the profession, or even doing it from an amateur perspective. It's far more attainable to get that really nice bass with the kit that's available now, because a lot of the kit just does it for you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, going back to when I was a kid, my dad managed an electrical store, and he brought home cassette recorders that I could use, and the sound quality of them was horrific, but I thought they were fantastic. I thought, wow, you can actually keep a sound. I was amazed by that. When I started working professionally, it was all Nagras, which younger people can Google those. They're a 1/4-inch tape machine, about this big. Record one track. They weigh more than several house bricks, and you got 15 minutes of recording. Very high quality recording, but those machines were staggeringly expensive. They were more than a car. They were very, very expensive, and so it wasn't really possible for a young person starting out, as I was then, to own a Nagra. I dreamed of it. Then along came DATs, digital tape, which were a lot cheaper, but still very expensive. But with solid state and with the Zoom recorders, like as I was mentioning before, this guy, which I take everywhere. I've just taken it to the outback. I've been recording surround sound winds and birds and crickets. I actually stuff it in my pocket. It's big enough, or I'm big enough, that I can stick this in my back pocket. And I call Atmos on recording on my family, much to their horror. Say, oh, sorry, everyone, 5-minute Atmos, if we just have quiet, please. And they're like, oh, Dad, please. They're like, oh, I'll stay here. You walk on. I'll record an Atmos and we'll catch up. And and the sound quality from these devices is astonishing. It is really quite astonishing. So I use this all the time. I have other Zoom products as well, but as a starting point, as to be able to think, wow, that's an interesting sound. I'd like to capture that. The starting point that we have now technologically with these Zoom products was unimaginable even 10 years ago.
Totally, and also the hard drive space is minimal. Whenever I go out, it's going to be at least a few gig, and because it's all vision, so sound itself is far more manageable. Do you have a favorite genre you like to go towards now, or something that you think, hey, look, this is like a dream project, or are you more based around all sound is enjoyable if you're aiming towards a specific goal or emotion?
For a while, my dream was to work on movies like Happy Feet and like Lego Movie, those really big blockbuster sound design projects. And in a way, I feel like I've done that, and to work on that level, I feel like I've actually covered the whole spectrum of projects that I like to work on. And so now I'm very very flexible, not as sort of constantly driving to get to that level. Now I'm kind of much more relaxed, and I'm like, oh, sure, we'll work on this or that, whatever comes my way that I like. For example, I'm working on an animated film at the moment. It's a no-budget animated film called Goodbye Home. It's 5 minutes long. It was made by filmmakers and animators in response to the fires in Malakuta. It doesn't have festival funding. It doesn't have any Screen Australia funding. It's just these people wanted to tell this story, and they reached out to me and said, we want to tell the story. We don't have much money, but we heard about your work and your involvement in animation and filmmaking, and we'd love you to be the sound designer. So that's a project I'm doing at the moment. But similarly, I've just worked on 2 feature films this year, various funding levels. One was a sci-fi, one was a drama, and another project was a documentary, all set in Antarctica. And they all have sound aspects that are thrilling or interesting or challenging. I guess I like the variety. I really like having a range of projects and a range of challenges.
It's interesting, because I think when you look at let's say any project, and you've gone from your feature films down to your small documentaries and your, let's say, philanthropic exercises where people don't have budgets per se. When you apply yourself to a project as a creative, it's not really you're driven by budget. You're driven by challenges, and that's what I'm hearing through what you're saying. If you're a young kid starting off right now, what journey would you tell he or she to go on to be happy as a creative in the area of sound?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting one, because I do get approached by young people, and I sort of help out with some schools who do film festivals, and I sort of mentor a little bit. And there are young people who come through and they say, "Oh, I'm going to do the such and such course at this university or this private institution or whatever, and then I'll be a sound designer. Then I'll be one." And it's like, well, you will have a qualification as one, but the main thing that you have to have is an unending passion for it. You have to have constant drive, a constant need. Like, it's not a job. You don't really look in the paper or seek these days and go, "Oh, look, there's a sound designer job. Well, there's 20 sound designer jobs. I'll apply for those." They're not there. But if you love doing it, if you're compelled to listen to things and to record things and to manipulate sounds in whatever way, then I think that passion will come through. And that's, I recently spoke on a panel to University of New South Wales graduates in their media students. And on the panel was Hugh Remington, myself, and a lady who was the executive editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. And it turned out that none of us had university degrees. And the university host was somewhat alarmed. But we all had the same view, which was that if you have passion for whatever it might be, you might be passionate about making spoons. Well, that's great. Make the most beautiful and amazing spoons you want to make. But if you're passionate about sound, then explore that passion, go with it, and tell people you have that passion. And I think a life or a career can come from that. I've been very fortunate, and I've been very, very driven to explore my passions. But yeah, just go with what you love. I guess that's what I'm saying.
That's it. It's a degree in life. I mean, any crew that I ever have, I always explain to them day one is we sit down and I tell them two things. Number one, they're all more qualified than me. And secondly, that we have a privileged situation where we get to manufacture a memory that once everything's gone and finished, that's all that remains. And they're the two things that I've told over and over again through my career. I'm curious then, because we've got movies, but then you've obviously crossed a lot of boundaries. You've picked up the camera, you've done some filming, you've dealt with musicians. What's it like engaging, because you've got to cross experiences through all genres? What's it like when you then sit down with the cinematographers or even with a musician or someone and you explain to them, hey, hold on, maybe this sound could be this or that? I mean, it's an interesting position to have when you're talking to other artists when traditionally you're the sound guy. And what are some of the experiences you've had along those lines?
Yeah, I suppose I often keep it my work quite compartmentalized in a way. If it's professional work and I've been engaged to be the sound designer or the sound recordist, I might make the crew or other people I'm working with aware that I have other experience as well. But I keep my focus very much on the realm that I'm there to perform for them. I might, engage on their field sometimes, but I found, and this is almost like speaking from a service provider standpoint. It's that when you're working with someone who's paying you to be there for a very specific role, they really just want to experience you in that role deeply, that you are deeply committed to that role, as I am. But it does also, can be helpful to talk to other departments or other department heads or filmmakers you're working with. You can say that, "Oh, I understand where you're at. I can see what point you're at because I've done this work as well." And so it's more about, it creates, I think at times, a more relaxed vibe because they don't have to explain to me necessarily what they're doing or what they're going through. And even with producers, I think it helps sometimes that I've produced a movie in the past and I explain that I've had this dubious, stressful, unendingly stressful experience, so I know where they're at. And one of the really nice things about doing sound post actually is that it's the very last part of a process. And for some filmmakers, it might have been a 10 or a 15-year process to get to this point where you're there with them and they are actually going to finish. They're going to finish this project with you in that moment. And that's an incredible privilege that I've experienced on a lot of projects. And so that can be, a really great thing, a really great part of the work too.
So what I've also explained to other people listening to this is, for example, maybe going back 10 years, it was okay just to be a sound guy or a shooter or an editor or a producer. But now I think the advice I give to a lot of younger people coming up is you've got to really do 2 or 3 other things, because if you can become a proficient editor, but you want to be a cinematographer, gosh, it makes your filming far better, because you know that when you deliver your rushes, you don't have a million of them. It's more precise. And this is obviously in the world of documentary making. But from your perspective, how important is having the understanding of all the other steps in the process in the new economy, in the new world we're living in, as opposed to just being focused on the one genre and that's it?
Oh, I think it's really important to understand as many of the processes as possible. There's nothing gained by remaining ignorant of anything, and so and that's true of filmmaking as well. There are so many processes and approaches and people and crafts, and I don't profess to be across all of them at all. I still constantly learn new things, which I enjoy. I think your point about people being multi-skilled, I think that's very important in Australia, especially. I mean, globally at the moment, because of the pandemic, most industries are in some sort of free fall or shutdown, so usual conditions don't apply. But in somewhere like America, where it's very, very, very specialized, and people learn a speciality, whatever it might be. It might be cinematography, it might be camera, it might be assistant editor, and they remain an assistant editor for possibly decades and become one of the greatest assistant editors or one of the greatest, second grips. Whereas here in Australia, we tend to start somewhere and weave our way through all sorts of things until we arrive at a place that we're most comfortable. But I think with the way the industry and the way there's so much screen content being produced now, I think being multi-skilled is to some degree essential for long-term success. If you can if you can handle a camera and handle the sound recorder and know how to throw up a light, then know how to even basically put it together. So as you say, you're going to be so much better off because you know what you're shooting, you know how it's going to be structured later. So understanding how something is structured and understanding how then to film it or light it, even the most basic way, you're going to be a far more employable and valuable contributor to a project.
Absolutely. So do you have any favorite sounds? Do you have any favorite things that you just, apart from your whistle, I know you've kept for a while. I mean, are there any favorites? I know when I'm doing stuff, I'll always gravitate to certain things. I've done a lot of filming in the Himalayas, and there's certain things I'll always just go and film because I just gravitate towards it. From a sound perspective, there, like as you said, when you're recording Atmos, so there's certain things that you just like to record that you might record and never use, but you've just got them.
Yes, I'm constantly drawn to the sound of flowing water. I love, I could record streams all day long. I've got oodles of recordings of streams and rivers and waterways I'll never use, but they're there. I mean, I heard a sound when I was in New Zealand years ago that really stuck with me. It was up on top of a glacier. I was hiking on a glacier, and there was a little waterway flowing on top of the ice, and some very thin sheet ice cracked and flowed in the waterway, and it actually tinkled like a wind chime. It was a combination of a wind chime and a stream tinkling across the top of the ice. Unfortunately, I didn't have a sound recorder with me at that time. It was in the 90s, and they were far too big and cumbersome to take up onto a glacier. I'm hoping I'll go back one day. So things in flow are very appealing. I mean, in the outback last week, I was recording a lot of desert winds. It was very enjoyable. I was there on holiday, but I was also there partly because I'm the sound supervisor for an upcoming TV project called Royal Flying Doctor Service, which is filming out there at the moment. So I caught up with the crew, and and I knew, because I'd been looking at episodes coming in, and I knew what sort of atmospheres and things I was going to need for the series. So I incorporated that into my holiday, the Atmos stops and Atmos recordings of winds and things. And winds in the desert are, they're just such a delicious sound. And so that was that was a real treat to be able to combine the holiday and some sound recording, at the same time. I could
A lot of people will,
travel the country.
they'll bring fear into people's minds. Let's go out and record wind, because normally that's the bane of any sound. I mean, wind to most people is just a pest. And I just laugh when you get passionate about the wind. For those that might be listening to this and wondering, like, how do you record good wind?
Well, it's mostly the effect of wind upon an object. So wind itself, if you stick a microphone in the wind, it's just going to be, and that's the wind every dialogue editor and sound recordist detests. But if you can get a little bit of wind whistling around a salt bush in a desert, and what you're hearing then is the interaction of the wind with the world. So, and that's what's evocative. So, everyone has heard a spooky wind, which is, wind interacting with a structure or a gap in a structure and then reverberating. That's a spooky wind. Or we hear wind in a casarina, which is and it's a very calming, very soothing sound. So wind, recording the sound of wind is really, it's wind interacting with an environment.
So when you go for a leisurely stroll with your family, do you find yourself being hyper aware of sounds versus vision? But you've done filming as well, so you're just a sensory. Is that how you created your hairstyle? You're just like sensory, just exploding, because it's not just visually, but it's the auditory nerves are just going crazy. I mean, did your brain ever shut down, or are you permanently walking around just noticing things?
It doesn't shut down, no. Weirdly, if I've been filming, because as you say, I do quite a bit of camera work as well. If I've been doing that, then I'm much more optically attuned. I'm like, oh, look at that light, and oh, I like that shadow, and look at those shapes, and look at that reflection. If I haven't been filming, then I kind of fall back into, oh, listen to that, and I'll find myself going up and tapping things. Oh, what's that? And my wife Nadi will be like, come on, we're going. So I'm just listening to this fork. It's a really, really interesting fork. So there's a lot of that. She's very tolerant.
Look, I was just wondering how you turn off, because I can't. So I'm just, through this series, I'm trying to find little secrets to go, how do you turn your brain off? Because most of the industry is revolved around alcohol and caffeine and all these other stimulants to keep your brain going. They need to have a production stimulant that turns it off. So I was more after a little bit of a secret tip, but you don't have one.
I haven't found it. I haven't found the way to switch off yet.
Well, there we go. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting. I mean, do you have any questions of me, or anything you're curious about while we're here?
I'm curious about how you'll be using the films and who else you're interviewing and all that sort of thing. Is it a range of musicians and filmmakers, or what's?
It's a cross section of people. So we've gone from a professional drummer through to an ex-Queensland police officer that is basically solving crimes with a podcast after he left the police force. So it's a huge range through to other musicians and other creatives, because we're talking about the importance of sound in itself. And a lot of people, and if you look at all the social media and all the marketing, it's all about, more resolution, bigger cameras, and still these days, unless you're in motion pictures, HD is still a standard broadcast format. Yet the manufacturers of all the camera gear, they're having to push, this silly thing of dynamic range and 4K, 8K, 16K, whereas sound has been forgotten. And you could film an entire feature on an iPhone if you got the lighting basically right, but you've got really good sound. And I think sound just got forgotten. And so from my perspective, I've been passionate about it, because now I can actually capture sounds without having to, again, the budgets aren't there anymore for me to have a sound guy all the time. And I can utilize the Zoom products to capture perfect quality audio for all the films that I make anywhere. And it's never it's always in a very tumultuous environment. It's always in the outdoors. It's always in moments where you have one take. I can't remember in the last 10 years ever having a second shot at something. So I just wanted to really relay to the whole world, from the mums and dads that might be picking up a GoPro versus professionals that have gone, or a lot of my mates are cinematographers, and they don't even think about sound. They're just looking at the vision. So for me, it's about really highlighting, I guess, the importance of sound to create the emotion, because the image is the icing on the cake, whereas the sound is what creates that tingling sense in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think I know exactly what you mean. That frisson that that I experience from sound, and that audiences do from music and sound working in a film. And I don't think people experience that from visuals, or certainly not from visuals alone. And I just reflecting on, there was a sequence I worked on in the first Lego movie, which, there's a lot of assumption that it's all fun and wacky, and a lot of it was. I worked on all the sounds, or a lot of the sounds in Cloud Cuckoo Land, when they go up into the sky and it's all pretty wacky. And then Cloud Cuckoo Land gets destroyed. And I remember part of the brief was that this is Cloud Cuckoo Land dies, that this is actually the death of joy. And so that was the sound design brief for that. So there's all this really jolly, wacky sound going on that then has to transform into a sound that would produce, a feeling of mourning. And that was, and that is, the challenge of sound design for film. How do you create the sound of mourning and of joy dying in Lego? that was the brief at that point. And
so how do you do that?
I could tell you, but best to just go and watch the film. But it took quite a lot of doing.
Excellent. Nigel, it's been great having you to chat with, and hopefully people who watch this can learn a little bit about not just sound, but how to get into the career, how to be passionate about things, and also how to maybe improve on what they're currently doing. And I'm sure Zoom will provide some links and to some of your work and some bits and pieces. So, mate, thank you very much for having a chat and sharing your expertise and your passion.
Pleasure, Anthony. Thanks very much for inviting me on.